Notes for today are on functional groups. You should do your reading quiz first before doing these. And you also need 2 sets of papers. One is your notes, and the other one is a table that says draw the functional groups. You're going to draw yourself a picture as you go along. The draw the functional groups table should also be put in your notebook after your notes. The properties of a molecule depend on how the carbons are arranged and what's attached to the carbons. If you remember the notes from yesterday, a carbon skeleton is just a long chain of carbons and hydrogens, or a hydrocarbon. The stuff that you attach to them is going to give them different properties, and those things you attach are called functional groups. The functional groups behave the same no matter what they're attached to, so it's easy to look at a molecule, see what's attached to it, and say that this is how it's going to behave every time. So they always behave the same. So the number and arrangement of functional groups gives the molecules their unique properties. 6 most important ones for living things: hydroxyl, carbonyl, or carbonyl, carboxyl, amino, sulfhydryl, and phosphate. There are more that exist, but these are the 6 for biology, the 6 that the book went with. But if you take organic chemistry in the future, maybe you'll see the others. All 6 of these are hydrophilic, which means they like water. So even if the molecule they're attached to does not like water, they can make it like water. Our first one is the hydroxyl group, which is just an O and an H. So in these pictures, if you see that R there, that's the carbon chain. So there's a whole long chain of carbons, and at the end there's an oxygen and a hydrogen. The structure is OH, where the O bonds to the carbon skeleton. If you remember from when we did acids and bases, there was an OH involved there too. It's not the same thing, same atoms, but it's not doing the same thing. Their names are alcohols. Properties: they are polar, so it helps things to dissolve in water. An example would be ethanol. Carbonyl. So carbon is joined to oxygen by double bonds. So remember when you see a molecule structure and there's an intersection of lines but nothing's there? That's a carbon. So in both of those pictures, the top of that triangle thing, that's a carbon there. It's called a ketone if it's in the middle of the carbon skeleton. So you can imagine that picture on the right there, that the one R is a bunch of carbons going off to the left, and the other R is a bunch of carbons going off to the right. And in the middle somewhere, there's a double bond with an oxygen. That would be a ketone. Aldehyde is the same thing, but it's on the end. So there's only a long chain of carbons going off to the left side. They can be isomers of each other, so something like acetone is a carbonyl group. Acetone is what is in nail polish remover. Carboxyl. There's a carbon that is double bonded to an oxygen and single bonded to a hydroxyl. So in that picture, remember the R is a whole bunch of carbons along carbon chain. At the very end, it's attached to a carbon. That carbon has a double bond with one oxygen and a single bond with another oxygen and hydrogen. They are called carboxylic acids or organic acids. So that means that they will donate hydrogens. They will give up hydrogens and make it more acidic. Acetic acid, that's vinegar. It's a carboxyl groups. Amino. So in this picture, instead of having an R, that's the squiggly. You can imagine the long chain of carbon where the squiggly is. So in this case, it's a nitrogen that is bonded to 2 hydrogens. And those 2 random dots next to the nitrogen, those are just extra electrons. The name is called amines. They are bases. That means that they will accept other hydrogens. And this one is super important. These are the amino acids. We'll see more about those in a few days when we do the proteins, but these are parts of an amino acid. You're going to see amino groups. Two more. Sulfhydryl. It has a sulfur and a hydrogen. So again, the R is a carbon chain. At the end, there would be a sulfur and hydrogen attached. These are called thiols. Basically, they stabilize proteins, and ethane thiol is an example. So you might see sulfur and hydrogen stuck on the end of some proteins. And lastly, phosphate. I'd say out of all of these, amino and phosphate are the ones that you absolutely 100% positive need to know, the amino and phosphate. The other ones are important too, but I can guarantee you amino and phosphate are coming back over and over and over again. So, the name of this one looks a little weird, I know. But it's basically a phosphorus that has 4 oxygens around it. So, R is the carbon chain. It's bonded to an oxygen. And there's a phosphorus in the middle that connects to all those different oxygens. This is called organic phosphate. It can transfer energy between molecules. For example, ATP is called adenosine triphosphate. That is a super important molecule that you're going to see soon. But ATP has an adenosine group, which we'll talk about that later. It's just a carbon chain with a bunch of rings. And then 3 like tricycle has 3 wheels, 3 phosphates attached to it. So there's 3 of these groups attached. They transfer energy by adding on phosphates and removing phosphates. So this is going to come back. This is how living things pass on energy. So I'd say if you wanted to star and highlight something really important, phosphate groups and the amino groups, because you're going to see those again in proteins. So I believe there were more examples in the book. I know you can use Google to find more if you're still confused, or if you have any questions, let me know. I'll be back tomorrow.